However, the evening everything shifted. My granddaughter looked at me with those heavy, unfocused eyes and whispered that she didn't want to take her father's pills anymore. That one sentence cut through the quiet I'd been keeping for years. A man can ignore many things, but not the way a child flinches when someone they trust hands them a bottle. I didn't know it then, but the truth waiting behind that moment would change my home forever. And maybe it will remind someone out there of their own silence. I was watching my granddaughter finish her homework at the kitchen table when the bottle slipped from her hand and rolled across the floor, water spreading in a thin sheet under her feet. Before she could even reach for a towel, her father snapped at her. "Can't you be careful for once?" His voice cracked through the room like a belt pulled too tight. The girl froze, shoulders hunched, eyes blinking fast. I straightened instinctively, ready to step in, but he pivoted toward me with that look I had come to recognize. "Don't interfere, Ray. I'll handle my child." The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. That tone, sharp but measured, was his way of telling me I had crossed a line I hadn't even stepped over. My granddaughter pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself small. I laid a hand on the back of her chair, not touching her directly, just close enough to let her know I was still there. He scooped up the bottle and tossed it in the sink with a clatter. "See? Now we'll be running late again." No apology, not even to the little girl whose eyes were now fixed on the wet floor as if the puddle might swallow her whole. My daughter came in a moment later, grocery bags hanging from both arms, cheerful until she sensed the tension. She glanced at her husband, then at me, waiting for someone to explain. Neither of us did. I grabbed a dishcloth and wiped the water while the two of them talked about dinner plans as though nothing had happened. My granddaughter lingered by my side, quiet as a breath. When it was time for me to leave, she held onto my sleeve. "Grandpa, are you coming back tomorrow?" "Of course," I murmured. But her question sat strangely with me, like she needed reassurance about something she couldn't name. Her father called her back into the living room, telling her to clean her shoes. She nearly jumped. I stepped out onto Milwaukee Avenue with my coat unbuttoned and the wind sliding under the fabric. The sun was lowering behind the row of houses, and the shadows stretched across the pavement, long and uneven. My own shadow trailed behind me, thin and lonely, in a way I hadn't noticed before. For years, I had excused many things, believed it wasn't my place to question how another man ran his home, told myself that silence kept the peace, that stepping aside was the price of letting my daughter have her own family without me hovering. Yet something about the way he spoke, the way he looked right through me, as if I had no standing in that house, left a sting I couldn't shake off. I tried to walk it out, past the corner store, nodded to a couple sitting outside the laundromat, crossed the street without looking up. None of it helped. The same thought kept circling back. I had stayed quiet, not because it was the wise thing to do, but because I had grown too used to shrinking myself to avoid conflict. My granddaughter's face kept returning to me. The flinch, the quick swallow, the silence she mirrored from the adults around her. Children notice everything, even when we pretend they don't. If she saw me being dismissed like that, what did it teach her about herself? About the value of someone who loves her? A bus rumbled past, shaking the sidewalk. I stopped walking. The sound faded, leaving a pocket of quiet made my chest feel heavier, not lighter. I wondered when exactly my voice had started slipping away, when I began accepting the idea that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I reached my block and stood at the gate of my small front yard, gripping the metal bar until my fingers ached. The porch light buzzed softly, flickering the way it always did. But something inside me wasn't flickering. Something had snapped clean. I unlocked the door, hung my coat on the same hook I'd used for years, and sat at the table without turning on the television or the radio. The house didn't feel quiet in the usual comforting way. It felt like a place where a man sits when he realizes he has been invisible in his own family. My granddaughter's question came back again. Are you coming back tomorrow? Maybe she sensed the tension, or maybe she sensed something shifting in me. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm them, though they were already warm. Beneath the skin, beneath the years of habit and patience, there was a pressure building, slow, steady, insistent. I wasn't sure what it meant yet. I only knew the silence I carried home wasn't the gentle kind anymore. It pressed against my ribs, sharp and certain, making room for something I hadn't named. I stayed there a long time, elbows on the table, fingers laced together, letting the thoughts run until they stopped colliding with each other. Only then did I stand, stretch my back, and stare at the window, where the street lamps were just beginning to glow. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't settle around me. It followed me instead, step by step, as though waiting to see what I would do next. The school doors had just opened when my granddaughter shuffled out, with her backpack slipping off one shoulder. I waved, expecting her usual little run toward me, but she moved slowly, rubbing her eyes as though she'd been dragged from a dream she never wanted. Before she reached me, her teacher stepped closer. "Mr. Ray," she said gently, lowering her voice. "Has she been feeling all right? She's been unusually sleepy in class, nodding off even during group activities." My granddaughter stood beside me, twisting the zipper of her jacket. The teacher went on, mentioning that another parent had asked if their child might be catching something, because several students noticed her struggling to stay awake. She didn't accuse anyone of anything, just shared concern, the kind that carries a quiet weight. I thanked her and walked my granddaughter toward the car. She climbed into the back seat, buckled herself in without a word. Halfway home, she leaned her head against the window. "Grandpa, can we go straight home today?" Her voice floated out thinly, like she'd been whispering all morning. "You tired again, baby?" She gave a small nod. Questions pressed against my mouth, but I held them back. My mind was split clean down the middle, one side urging me to keep the peace, not stir anything up, the other whispering that something about last night, about him snapping, about her flinch, wasn't just bad temper or parental strictness. Kids get tired, yes. Kids spill water, yes. Kids also don't carry exhaustion around like a second backpack unless something's pushing it onto them. I studied her through the rearview mirror while driving through afternoon traffic. Her eyelids kept dipping. A child that age shouldn't have to fight sleep in the middle of the day. That thought kept tightening around my chest. When we reached home, I walked her inside and settled her on the couch with her blanket. She curled up instantly, letting out a soft sigh, as though she'd been holding her breath since morning. Within minutes, she drifted off again. No cartoons, no snacks, no questions. Just sleep. Heavy. Immediate. I stood there for several minutes, debating whether to call my daughter. I picked up the phone twice and set it down twice. She had meetings, responsibilities, stress, and I knew how easily a man like her husband could twist my involvement into meddling. I'd heard enough comments from him to know what he thought of old folks interfering. Still, the sight of that little body curled tightly under a blanket never left my mind as evening approached. I drove to the coffee shop near my house, a place with old wooden booths and a smell of burnt espresso that never quite left the air. Miriam sat in her usual corner. She'd been doing that since her husband passed. We had known each other for decades. She was one of the few people who remembered my Barbara's laugh and the way she used to hum whenever she cooked. She looked up when I entered. "Well, if it isn't the man who refuses to age," she joked. I smiled, but not fully. Something in my expression must have betrayed me because she tapped the seat across from her. "Sit. Tell me what's eating you." I started with the smallest detail, the spilled bottle, the sharp tone from my son-in-law, the way the room froze. Then I mentioned the teacher's concern, my granddaughter's sleepiness, the quiet. Miriam listened without interrupting, her eyes focused, hands wrapped around her mug. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Ray," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Kids don't fall into that kind of tiredness just because life gets busy. Something's wearing her down, or someone is." Her voice wasn't dramatic, it wasn't accusing, it was factual, like a nurse pointing out a symptom you'd missed. She leaned back, letting her gaze rest on me in that steady way of hers. "You know this," she added softly. "You've raised kids. You've seen enough life to recognize when a child isn't just tired." A silence settled between us. She didn't fill it. She simply sat there, letting the truth hang, giving me room to absorb what she had said. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the table, trying to steady the tangle forming in my head. My granddaughter sleeping through the afternoon. My son-in-law brushing me off. The teacher's concern. The flinch. All those pieces that looked harmless alone suddenly started linking up. We talked a little longer, mostly about mundane things, but my mind felt like it was moving under a different rhythm. Every sentence Miriam spoke seemed to echo a little longer than usual. By the time I left the cafe, the sky had deepened, and the streetlights hummed quietly above the sidewalk. I drove home slowly, not wanting to step into the empty house just yet. That kind of loneliness hits differently when your thoughts are loud. Inside, I hung my keys on the hook and took off my jacket. The house held the usual stillness, but it didn't soothe me the way it usually did. My granddaughter's tired eyes kept surfacing. So did the teacher's cautious tone, and Miriam's steady certainty was still ringing in my mind. I sat at my kitchen table, palms pressed flat against the cool surface, trying to gather myself. Questions pressed in from every direction, none of them simple. Was this truly something serious? Was I misreading? Was it my old habit of stepping in too fast because I blamed myself for what happened years ago? I leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. The room didn't offer answers. It rarely did. Outside, a car passed, its engine fading down the block. Another noise took its place. A faint tapping, maybe a branch against the siding. Ordinary sounds, filling the night, carrying on no matter what sat unresolved on my shoulders. My phone vibrated with a message from my daughter. "Dad, thanks for helping today. We appreciate it." Kind, warm, sincere. And somehow it made the weight inside my chest shift again, somewhere between guilt and frustration. I placed the phone face down and let my hand rest on it, not pressing, just holding it there. My breath moved in slow, uneven rhythm as I tried to sort through what to do next. The house settled around me. My thoughts didn't. The sink was half filled when the neighbour poked her head through the open back door. She came by often, usually with leftover muffins or some story about her garden. That afternoon she held a small package for my daughter and chatted while I rinsed the plates. "Is he still taking those allergy pills?" she asked casually. I stopped moving. "Which pills?" She blinked, realizing something didn't line up. "Oh, your granddaughter mentioned her dad gives her something for allergies. I figured it was the same stuff my nephew takes. Kids seem to pass those things around these days." She smiled politely and stepped out before I could respond, leaving me staring at the water running over my hands. Allergy pills? No one in the family had mentioned anything like that. My daughter certainly hadn't. My granddaughter never talked about allergies, not once in 10 years. A strange heaviness filled my chest. It wasn't fear yet, more like a warning, the kind that whispers before it shouts. I dried my hands and looked toward the living room. My son-in-law was sprawled on the couch scrolling through his phone. He didn't glance up when I walked past him to check on the kid's backpack. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but the zippers clinked loudly as I opened compartments one after another. No medicine, no bottle, just crayons, a math workbook, and crumbs from a granola bar. From the couch, his voice drifted over. "Ray, don't start tearing through her things. She's fine." There was an edge to it, more defensive than concerned. He didn't ask what I was looking for. He didn't even pretend curiosity. "I'm just checking her homework," I murmured. His phone clicked shut. The couch creaked as he leaned forward. "You don't need to check anything. I've got her schedule handled. Stick to picking her up and bringing her back. Too many cooks, you know?" I didn't answer. Every time I tried to understand him, the words bounced right off. He'd started dictating bedtime, meal times, what after-school activities she could attend. Little rules that didn't seem harmful on their own, but together they built a fence higher and higher. A fence meant to keep me out. Later, after everyone went upstairs, I began tidying the trash. Something white caught my eye at the bottom of the bag, a torn medicine box. I lifted it out with 2 fingers. The label was smudged, but I could make out fragments. Nighttime formula. Drowsiness. Not for children. My throat tightened. I checked the rest of the trash. Another box. A small blister pack. A folded receipt. None of them belonged in a house with a child that age. I slipped my phone from my pocket and snapped quick photos, careful not to make noise. The flash was off. The room stayed dim and quiet. I tucked everything back into the trash exactly the way I found it. My hands moved slowly, trying not to betray the tremor running through my fingertips. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the hallway. Then the bathroom door clicked shut. I froze until the sound faded. When the house settled again, I sank onto a chair at the edge of the kitchen. The tile felt colder than usual under my feet. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe evenly. Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into an innocent mistake? Had my granddaughter mentioned a cold or a rash, and I missed it? The questions didn't calm me, they churned harder. Every time my granddaughter looked tired, he blamed school. Every time she seemed confused, he blamed growth spurts. Every time she winced at his voice, he blamed her sensitivity. And we all let it slide, because families do that. We make excuses for discomfort so long, we forget when it first started. My daughter came downstairs to grab a glass of water. She smiled, worn from a long day. "Dad, you heading home soon?" "Yeah," I said. She held the glass with both hands. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about a few things." She waited for me to explain. I didn't. She didn't push. That was her way. Gentle, trusting, hoping people would sort themselves out if given enough time. When she walked back upstairs, her husband called out, "Turn the hallway light off." She did so instantly. I sat alone in the dim kitchen, the refrigerator humming behind me, the photos in my phone burning holes through my thoughts. Those boxes in the trash weren't for allergies. Anyone could see that. And yet he told others she was taking something. He wasn't even hiding it well, hiding it just enough to keep questions scattered and quiet. I stood, reached for my coat, and let myself out the back door. The yard was still, with only the rustle of a plastic bag caught in the fence. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel without turning it on. My hands rested on the steering wheel, as if waiting for orders my mind hadn't sorted out yet. The photos were still open on my phone. I enlarged them, one after another, reading each warning label. The words blurred, then sharpened again as I blinked. This wasn't stress. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't the kind of tiredness a teacher shrugged off or a child slipped out of. My heart beat in uneven pulses, but my thoughts felt oddly steady, like a path was clearing inside me, 1 inch at a time. I finally started the engine and pulled away from the curb. Gravel crackled under the tires, rising behind me in a soft scatter. The street stretched out in front of me, quiet and empty, and I drove slowly, thinking of the questions I still hadn't asked and the answers I already feared. The farther I went, the more the night air helped unclench the tightness around my ribs. Still, the unease stayed with me, settling into a place deeper than confusion. It followed me home, steady and patient, waiting for what I would do next. The grill smoked steadily in the corner of the yard, and my daughter moved between the tables, trying to keep conversations flowing. People from both sides of the family lounged in folding chairs, clutching paper plates and laughing in small clusters. It should have been an easy afternoon, the kind where you let yourself enjoy food and company without thinking too hard. I stood near the cooler, pouring lemonade for my granddaughter, when my son-in-law raised his voice over the chatter. "Ray's a good man," he announced, "but he's stuck in the past, always telling us how things should be done, even though parenting today isn't what it was back in his day." The yard quieted in pieces. Several heads turned. He wasn't joking. His tone carried just enough disdain to make sure everyone heard the insult. Someone muttered awkwardly. Another laughed too loudly. My granddaughter's hand tightened around my sleeve. My daughter gave a thin, brittle smile, eyes darting between us, doing her best to pretend nothing was off. I didn't answer him, didn't shake my head, didn't correct him, just held his stare until he looked away, pretending to fuss with the burger patties. My daughter approached with the serving tray, her smile held for the crowd, but her fingers trembled around the tongs. "Dad, could you put the lemonade inside?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice from breaking. I nodded and carried the pitcher indoors. The kitchen felt oddly calmer despite the noise drifting through the open window. I stood for a moment, letting the air settle around me. My granddaughter followed, hovering by the counter. "Grandpa, did Daddy make you sad?" she asked. I touched her shoulder gently. "Go play, sweetheart." She left reluctantly, glancing back twice as though she knew more than she should. After people finished eating, the crowd started thinning out. Cars pulled away from the curb, leaving behind paper cups and crumpled napkins on the lawn. My daughter collected stray plates while her husband lingered near the gate, arms folded. Once the last guest stepped through, he moved directly into my path. "You made things awkward today," he said quietly, almost friendly. "You always do when you start with your old-fashioned nonsense." "I didn't say a word," I replied. "That's right," he murmured, leaning in. "And that's exactly what I need you to keep doing. Don't interfere again." The words weren't loud, but they landed sharply. He stepped aside just long enough for me to cross the patio. As I reached the gate, the metal latch snapped behind me. Then came the sound of the lock sliding into place. Deliberate, slow, meant to send a message. I stood on the sidewalk, the sun dipping behind the trees, my daughter still inside cleaning up leftover food. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't threatened, yet the meaning was clear as day. He wanted control of that house, and my absence. Walking away from the yard, I felt the shift in my bones. This wasn't just friction between generations or a disagreement about rules. It had turned into something colder, something calculated. A quiet war forming beneath everyday conversations. I headed toward my car, passing the neighbors' recycling bins lined along the fence. Somewhere behind me, the clatter of dishes echoed faintly through the open kitchen window. I imagined my daughter stacking plates with her head lowered, probably trying to pretend everything was fine, the same way she had been pretending for months. The car door groaned when I opened it. I sat inside without starting the engine, letting my hands rest on my knees. A breeze drifted through the open window, carrying faint bits of the barbecue smoke with it. I traced a slow circle on the steering wheel with my thumb, trying to ease the knot forming beneath my ribs. A few kids were playing down the block, tossing a basketball against a garage door. One of them shouted, the ball thudded again, and their laughter rose over the street. Ordinary sounds, simple and familiar, yet they hit me with a weight I couldn't explain. Maybe because the normalcy felt far away from the tension I'd just walked through. I leaned back in the seat. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me shifted, just a fraction. Enough for me to feel the difference. Enough for me to recognize that whatever had been simmering beneath the surface wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my daughter. "Dad, are you home yet?" I typed a reply slowly. "Just left. You okay?" A moment passed before she answered. "Yeah, just tired." Her words tightened something deep in my stomach. Tired. That same word she'd been using for months. Tired from work. Tired from stress. Tired from life. Tired in ways she never had been before. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and stared ahead at the quiet street. A couple walked a dog past my bumper. A grocery bag rustled at the foot of a porch. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual, yet my pulse kept a steady, uneasy rhythm that refused to calm. Starting the engine, I pulled away from the curb slowly. Leaves scraped across the pavement as the car rolled forward. Behind me, the house sat still, its windows reflecting the last bit of evening light. I didn't glance back again. The road stretched out in front of me, taking me toward home. But my thoughts didn't follow. They stayed stuck in that yard, with the forced smiles, the quiet stares, the words he used to paint me as a relic. By the time I reached my block, I had driven slower than usual, letting the motion settle my breathing. I parked, locked the car, and headed up the walkway toward my porch. Inside, I dropped my keys on the table and stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. My hands rested on the counter, steady but tense. I didn't speak, didn't sigh, didn't force an answer out of myself. Just stayed there, letting the imbalance of the day swirl around me, looking for a place to land. Miriam phoned just after sunset, her voice carrying an urgency she rarely used. "Ray, come over when you can. I found something you should look at." She didn't explain further. She never wasted words unless they mattered. Her house sat 2 blocks from mine, and I covered the distance briskly. She opened the door before I even knocked, holding a thin folder against her chest. Her expression told me whatever waited inside wasn't small. We sat at her dining table. She slid the folder toward me without ceremony. "I was helping the school nurse earlier," she said. "Your granddaughter's file was misplaced. I saw this by accident, but once I read it, I knew you needed to see it." The pages felt heavier than they should have. I flipped through them slowly. Notes from the nurse, observations about fatigue, repeated mentions of excessive daytime sleepiness. Weeks of it, not days, weeks. My throat tightened as I read line after line. "She's been falling asleep during reading hour," I murmured. "And during art class," Miriam added. "Kids don't suddenly collapse into exhaustion without a cause." I felt her watching me, but my eyes stayed on the papers. Somewhere in the middle of those clinical notes, my memory dragged me backward, toward the living room 2 weeks earlier, and my granddaughter struggled to keep herself awake while her father rummaged in his jacket. "Just vitamins," he'd said. A white bottle, no label. He handed her a pill with the same ease someone hands out breath mints. She swallowed it and wilted within minutes, head sinking onto his shoulder, arms limp. I had brushed it off at the time, telling myself exhaustion happens. Kids nap. Parents know what they're doing. But the scene replayed now with clarity I couldn't ignore. Miriam reached across the table and tapped a section near the bottom. "That pattern. It's not normal." I've worked in clinics most of my life. When symptoms stack like that, there's usually a reason someone isn't telling you. I closed the folder and leaned back. My pulse drummed slowly, steadily, too calm for the thoughts racing through me. You think something's being given to her, I said quietly. I think someone needs to stop pretending everything is fine, she replied. There was no judgment in her tone, only concern. The kind that carries truth whether you're ready for it or not. I stayed at her table a few minutes longer, trying to steady the storm forming in my chest. She didn't push. She just sat nearby, as if her presence alone was enough to keep the floor steady. Before leaving, she placed a hand on my shoulder. You've always been the one who protects the people you love. Don't let anyone talk you out of what you're seeing. Her words followed me out the door. The walk home felt different. My legs moved on their own while my mind replayed every incident, every sleepy afternoon, every short answer from my son-in-law, every moment he tightened his grip on that child's routine. The fence he built around her didn't look like structure anymore. It looked like a cage. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the living room, reached into my coat, and pulled out the white bottle I'd taken from their trash earlier that week. I'd meant to look it up, but fear, or denial, kept me from doing it. The bottle rolled across my palm. No markings, no instructions, just the cheap cap and faint scratch marks near the rim, as if someone had peeled off a sticker. I set it on the coffee table and studied it, waiting for my breathing to settle. The house was quiet, except for the soft tick of the clock in the hallway. My granddaughter's face floated into my mind, those half-closed eyes, the way her body sagged whenever he gave her vitamins. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. Can we talk tomorrow? He's upset. Says you're stirring things up. I read the text twice. Stirring things up. That was his claim now. A man who had been slipping control out of her hands inch by inch, now trying to paint me as the disruptor. I placed the phone face down. A long breath left my chest, softer than a sigh. For the first time in a long while, the decision forming inside me didn't come from guilt or fear. It came from something older, something steadier. My fingers wrapped around the bottle again. The plastic felt thin under my grip. I didn't squeeze it hard, just enough to feel its shape, its weight, its presence in my home. I rose from the couch, walked to the dining table, and set the bottle next to the folder Miriam had given me. Seeing them side by side made everything sharper, clearer, undeniable. I stood there a long moment, hands braced on the edge of the table, letting the reality settle as quietly as it needed to. The decisions ahead weren't small. They weren't simple. But they were no longer questions. Not really. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and opened the folder again, reading each line with new eyes. My granddaughter walked beside me through the lobby of University of Chicago Medicine, her hand barely wrapped around my fingers. She moved carefully, as if every step required thought. I could feel the bottle hidden in my jacket, tapping against my ribs with each stride, like a reminder I didn't want, but couldn't ignore. A nurse led us into an exam room. My granddaughter climbed onto the table, swinging her feet slowly. When the pediatrician stepped in, she greeted us kindly, but her expression shifted the moment I placed the bottle in her hand. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "Her father gave her pills from that," I replied. The doctor turned the bottle over several times. She didn't hide her concern. "We'll run tests immediately," she said, and motioned for a nurse to take my granddaughter to the lab. My granddaughter glanced back at me once, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, before following the nurse down the hallway. The room felt smaller once she left. The doctor asked a few more questions when I first noticed the sleepiness, how long it had lasted, whether I'd seen similar bottles before. I answered everything I could, my voice level but thick. "We'll contact you as soon as the results are ready," she said. I nodded, unable to find anything else to say. Days of waiting followed. Not long on a calendar, but long inside a man's mind. I didn't spend them idle. Sitting still would have been the worst thing I could do. My daughter stopped by my house the next day with a bag of groceries. She moved with the tiredness she'd been carrying for months. After she set things down, I told her I needed to check something important and asked if I could look through the bank statements tied to the household account. She hesitated only a moment before handing me her login information. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. "It's not trouble," I said gently. "It's clarity." She left soon after, but the way she lingered at the door told me she sensed something shifting around her, even if she couldn't name it. Once alone, I opened her account on my laptop and scanned the transactions line by line. Withdrawals scattered across weeks with no explanation. Cash pulled from ATMs late at night. Purchases at pharmacies I knew she never visited. A few transfers into a secondary account under her husband's name, an account she didn't know existed. Each irregularity tugged at a thread I'd been afraid to pull. During a lunch break 2 days later, I stopped by Miriam's place. She didn't hover or press. She simply poured coffee and sat across from me while I read through printed statements and receipts spread across her dining table. "You're seeing the pattern, right?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said, running my thumb along the edge of a receipt. "I'm seeing too much." She didn't say more. Her silence wasn't empty. It was supportive, steadying. At home that evening, I filled the notebook with short entries. Nothing poetic, just dates, observations, inconsistencies. Times my granddaughter fell asleep in the middle of the afternoon. Times my son-in-law refused to let me take her to the park alone. Times he snapped without reason. I didn't trust memory anymore. It needed proof, a trail that couldn't be denied. My phone buzzed throughout the week with messages from him. Some curt, some strangely polite, some half accusatory, as if he sensed I was paying attention in ways he didn't like. "You're making things complicated. She doesn't need extra appointments. Stop confusing my wife. We're handling our own business." He didn't know what I knew, but he felt the pressure shifting. People who rely on control can sense when their grip starts slipping. On Thursday afternoon, I visited the lawyer recommended by a retired co-worker. A firm handshake and a calm voice greeted me inside a small office lined with casebooks. I explained what I'd seen, what the doctor suspected, and what I suspected even more. "Gather documentation," she told me. "Every detail. If this goes where I think it might, you'll need timelines, medical records, financial evidence, anything showing a pattern of risk." She didn't judge my daughter. She didn't scold me for waiting. She simply recognized the weight of what I carried. Walking out of that office, I felt something harden in me. Not anger. Resolve. The kind that comes from realizing you spent too long avoiding a responsibility only you could take on. That night, while eating a simple dinner at my kitchen table, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. A man older than he felt, steadier than he looked. A man who'd raised a daughter through grief. A man now responsible for a child who trusted him without conditions.
My granddaughter's school called the next morning to confirm they had forwarded medical documents to the hospital. I thanked them, then sat in the car for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel. The city moved around me, cars merging, buses stopping, people hustling to jobs or errands or lives that weren't unraveling. The ordinariness felt strange, almost foreign. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. I heard you took her to the doctor. Why? She's fine. Don't start problems. I didn't answer. He sent another. She needs rest, not interference. I scrolled back through the week's messages, each one a thread of hostility covered in thin politeness. Then I opened my notebook and added the date and time next to another entry. Text intimidation. As I wrote, a faint knock sounded at my door. I jolted slightly, expecting trouble, but it was only the mailman delivering a package. I signed for it and returned inside, though my pulse stayed uneven for a minute longer. Late that evening, my daughter called. "He's upset you're digging around," she said quietly. "I'm not digging," I replied. "I'm protecting my granddaughter." There was a long pause. "Dad, be careful," she whispered, and hung up. I remained at the table long after the call ended. Papers lay scattered around me, medical notes, receipts, printed messages. The bottle sat at the center of everything like a small, silent accusation. My hands moved slowly as I sorted and rechecked each document. I wasn't rushing. Rushing leads to mistakes. This needed precision, calm, strategy. Through the stillness of the room, I felt the shift again, that subtle pressure that tells a man he's past the point of standing down. I stacked the papers into a neat pile, slid them into a folder, and set it beside the notebook. The night stretched on, quiet and steady, while my thoughts kept shaping the next steps, inch by inch. The doctor didn't soften her voice when she walked into the room. She held the chart firmly, her expression steady, but her eyes told the truth before her mouth did. "We found traces of a strong sedative," she said. "This medication is absolutely not intended for children." My granddaughter sat beside me on the exam bed, one hand resting on my forearm. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the tension that rose in the room. I swallowed hard and nodded for the doctor to continue. She explained how the compound works, how it induces heavy sleep, how repeated exposure can affect cognition. Her tone stayed professional, but the undercurrent of alarm was unmistakable. My granddaughter leaned against me. "Grandpa, can we go home?" Her voice wavered, thin as thread. I didn't trust myself to answer. The words would have cracked in half. The doctor stepped out to finalize paperwork, and I walked to the window. Frost clung to the glass, blurring the outside world into smudged shapes. My reflection stared back at me, older than I felt yesterday, heavier than I had ever seen myself. A sedative, not an allergy pill, not vitamins, not exhaustion from school. Something inside my chest gave way. Not enough to break, but enough to leave a hollow that ached deeper than any wound from my working years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from him. "What did you tell the doctor?" "Don't start drama. She's always been a sleepy kid." Before I could process the anger rising in me, another message followed. "If you confuse my wife, I'll make sure you stay out of decisions you don't understand."
My grip tightened around the phone. The hallway felt narrower as I walked back to the bed. My granddaughter reached for my hand again, and I let her small fingers intertwine with mine. Her trust burned more sharply than any accusation he could throw. When we got home, the living room was uncomfortably quiet. My daughter greeted us at the door, worry pulling at her face. He stood behind her, arms folded, performing concern like a man reading lines. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. I didn't reply. I handed my daughter the printed summary. She skimmed the first paragraph and fell silent. A thin tremble moved across her mouth. He snatched the papers. "This is wrong," he snapped. "She has a mild neurological thing, runs in families. Ree just doesn't understand modern medicine." I stepped forward. "That's not what the doctor said." He scoffed loudly. "The doctor doesn't know her history. I do. And you," he jabbed a finger toward me, "you're panicking over nothing." My granddaughter clung to my leg. She'd seen this tone before. She recognized the way he puffed himself up, anger disguised as authority. My daughter tried to keep the peace. "Can we talk calmly?" she asked, voice shaking. He rounded on her. "Your father is the problem. He's the one causing chaos. He's turning you against me." Her shoulders curled inward. She looked smaller in that moment, like all the years of trying to maintain harmony had finally caught up to her. He wasn't finished. "He's been meddling non-stop, telling you what to do, scaring the kid, acting like we can't handle our own child. It's pathetic." My granddaughter pressed herself closer against me. The heat of her fear traveled through my ribs. She didn't speak, just waited for the yelling to stop, the same way she waited after every outburst. He noticed her hiding behind me and snapped his fingers. "Come here," he ordered. She flinched. Something inside me, quiet until then, rose all at once. Not rage, not impulse. Something colder, sharper. Something I hadn't felt since the day I buried my wife and realized I had to raise a daughter alone. Responsibility fused with finality. "You're not taking her anywhere," I said. He barked a humorless laugh. "You don't get a say." My daughter whispered, "Please stop." But he kept pushing. "Ray, you don't know anything about her health. You don't know anything about raising kids today. Just stick to picking her up from school and keep your nose out of my business." The words hit my daughter like blows. Each one chipped a little more of her out of the picture until she looked like a shadow clinging to the edge of her own home. I stepped between him and the child. "Don't talk to her like that." He rolled his eyes. "You really are losing it." My daughter tried again. "Can we all calm down?" He cut her off with a sharp curse and a glare that made her take a step back. That was enough. Not because of his tone, not because of the disrespect toward me, but because my granddaughter had begun to tremble, her head pressed against my hip, her breath catching in short, uneven bursts. A child should never breathe like that in her own living room. I knelt to her level. "It's okay," I whispered. "Go get your coat." She didn't ask why. She just obeyed. He moved as if to block her path, but one look from me froze him in place. Not because I threatened him. I didn't need to. Something in my posture must have changed. He saw it, and for the first time, he took a step back.
My daughter followed us to the door. "Dad, what are you doing?" Her voice was strained, unsure, torn between loyalty and fear. "Taking her somewhere safe," I said quietly. He scoffed behind us. "You're kidnapping her now? Perfect. Absolutely perfect." I didn't turn around, didn't explain myself, didn't argue. Arguing gives an abuser more room to twist. I opened the door and guided my granddaughter outside. The air felt colder than earlier, carrying the scent of the approaching night. She held my hand tightly as we walked to the car. When she climbed into the back seat, she whispered, "Are we going home, Grandpa?" "Yes," I said. I buckled her in and closed the door gently. Before getting behind the wheel, I paused, not long, just enough to steady the next thought forming in my mind. Enough had happened. Enough had been ignored. Enough had been explained away. The time for hoping he would change was gone. The time for giving him the benefit of the doubt was gone too. The engine hummed to life, and I pulled away from the curb, guiding the car down the familiar road toward my house. My granddaughter leaned her forehead against the window, breathing softly. A strange calm settled over me. Not peace, not yet, but a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my pocket. I didn't reach for it. Not now. I drove slowly, thinking of everything still ahead, the decisions waiting on the other side of this night. The pharmacist recognized me the moment I stepped up to the counter. She was a young woman with a calm manner, someone who had seen me buy cough drops for years without ever asking for anything heavier. That afternoon, her gaze flicked to the white bottle in my hand before returning to my face. "Sir, can I ask where you got that?" she murmured. I hesitated. "Why?" She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "A man came in here a few weeks ago, asking for something similar. Same shape, same cap. He said it was for his own sleep problems, but then asked if it would knock out a kid. My manager told him absolutely not. He left angry." My pulse tightened. "What did he look like?" She described my son-in-law without needing a second guess. She added softly, "If that bottle came from your house, please check the ingredients. Some formulations can be dangerous." I thanked her and walked out before the weight in my throat turned into something harder to swallow. The cold air met me halfway down the sidewalk, steadying my steps, but not my thoughts. Pieces were falling into place faster than I could catch them all at once. I sat in my car, opened the notebook lying on the passenger seat, and began lining up everything I had gathered so far. Doctor notes, school records, receipts, bank transactions, photos of medicine boxes, the folder from the hospital, the bottle. Individually, they whispered. Together, they shouted. Another page of my notes held dates of his late-night withdrawals, amounts so inconsistent that even a careless spender wouldn't have scattered them like that. Some were taken on the same days my granddaughter slept half the afternoon. Others aligned with charges at pharmacies I had never seen my daughter use. His pattern wasn't the pattern of a man caring for his child. It was the pattern of someone surviving off secrets. I flipped another page. The evidence collected itself. Each line betrayed him more clearly than the last. A breadcrumb trail left not because he was careless, but because he believed no one would ever follow it. A part of me wondered how long he'd been weaving this web, how long my daughter had lived under the kind of pressure that steals years from a person. A few times she'd confessed she felt foggy, unsure whether she was imagining problems. He had convinced her she was overreacting, that she needed rest, that she worked too much, that I was making her anxious. Abusers don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper in ways that twist the truth just enough to blur the lines. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. You're causing confusion and tired of your interference. Then another. Let us handle our family. I set the phone aside without giving it time to demand anything more from me. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Miriam's place. She opened the door with that familiar expression, a mixture of concern, readiness, and the steadiness of someone who'd spent years in medical halls, witnessing the quiet tragedies of ordinary homes. Come in, she said. The documents spread across her coffee table shimmered with the disorder of a story trying to assemble itself. I sorted them into piles, grouping medical notes with photos, receipts with statements. She watched, silently, letting me work through the motions. What are you looking for? She asked after a few minutes. Not looking, I said. Confirming. She nodded. She knew the difference. I picked up the photo of the white bottle and pressed it beside the receipt from the pharmacy. Then I added the school report of her falling asleep repeatedly. Then the doctor's summary. Then a handwritten schedule from my daughter that showed when he had insisted she stay home while he took their daughter to run errands. Every piece connected, every line pointed back to him. Miriam leaned forward. Ray, you have enough now. More than enough. It's not just the medicine, I said. It's the money, the lies, the pressure he puts on her, the way he controls every decision. And your granddaughter? She asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was sitting right there between the documents. I left her house feeling more centered than I had in weeks. The anger had settled into something calmer, a kind of certainty that didn't flare, it simply stayed. Back home, I placed everything on my dining table. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that helps a man think clearly. I reviewed every detail one more time. The timeline didn't have gaps anymore. The missing answers from weeks ago had filled themselves in. He still walked around confident, still played the role of misunderstood father, still told my daughter I was stirring trouble. But for the first time, I could see exactly how he carried himself when cornered, with arrogance, not conviction. My granddaughter's laughter floated faintly from the living room. She had found her dolls and arranged them in a crooked circle on the rug. Her head lifted when I stepped closer. Grandpa, look, she said. They're having a tea party. I knelt beside her. Can I join? She nodded eagerly and handed me a tiny cup. You can sit here. This one's yours. While she poured imaginary tea into plastic cups, I studied her face carefully. Her cheeks still a bit pale, her eyes carrying a tiredness out of place for her age. But she smiled, and that smile persuaded me more than any document ever could. When she turned to arrange another doll, I traced a thumb across the rim of the small cup she'd given me, and let myself breathe for the first time that day. The pieces had formed the full picture now. Not a suspicion, not a question, a fact. He had placed that child in harm's way, and he believed he'd gotten away with it. I stood, walked to the table and stacked every paper neatly into the folder. My fingers moved slower than usual, not from hesitation,
but from the gravity of what the folder now represented. It wasn't just evidence.
It was a map, leading toward the confrontation I knew was coming. I slid the folder into my drawer beside the notebook. The wood closed softly, not final, not ominous, just part of the evening settling into its routine. My granddaughter called from the living room. "Grandpa, your turn again." I went to her, letting the drawer rest quietly in the dark, knowing exactly what waited inside it and what I would need it for soon. He opened the door with a smirk stretched across his face, the kind people wear when they believe they've already won a fight you never agreed to enter. I stepped past him without asking, carrying the folder under my arm. My daughter stood near the hallway, folding laundry. She paused when she saw me, eyes flickering with questions she was too tired to form. "I need a moment," I said. She nodded and stepped aside, unsure but willing. Her husband followed close behind me, muttering something about boundaries under his breath, though not clearly enough to force a confrontation yet. The dining table was cluttered with mail and a few toys. I cleared a space with the side of my hand, set the folder down, and removed the bottle first. The plastic clinked slightly against the wood. He froze for half a second, then laughed. Not from humor, but from disbelief mixed with fear. "Really? You're still going on about that?" he scoffed. "You don't understand what she needs. I told you." I placed the medical report beside the bottle, his laugh cut short. "What's that?" he demanded. "Read it," I said. My daughter stepped closer. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers as she scanned the first few lines. Her breath caught so faintly it almost disappeared into the room. "That's not real," he barked, snatching it from her. "Doctors get things wrong. They don't know her case." I opened the folder again and pulled out the second item, the school's record of her repeated sweep episodes. I laid it gently on the table. He didn't touch that one. "This is all misinterpreted," he said quickly. "Kids get tired. She's growing. There's nothing wrong with that." Next came the photo of the medicine box he'd thrown out. Then the pharmacy receipt. Then the screenshot of his pharmacy charge. Then the statement from my daughter's account showing the unexplained withdrawals. Each item landed softly, almost quietly. But every placement made him jerk, like someone had slapped him across the back. My daughter's eyes moved between the evidence and her husband's face. She wasn't crying, not yet. She just stared with a kind of stillness I hadn't seen in years, the kind that comes before a storm, or after one. He slammed a hand on the table. "This is harassment. You're trying to destroy my reputation," he shouted. "You're twisting innocent things. You're—" I set down the last page, the doctor's summary of the sedative. His voice cracked mid-sentence. He snatched it up as if he could tear the words apart before they reached anyone else's mind. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," he muttered. "This is junk science. People misunderstand lab results all the time. You're all—" "She's a licensed pediatrician," I said, "and she has no reason to lie." My daughter finally spoke, her voice so quiet the room leaned toward her. "Why were you giving her this?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The lies came too fast for him to choose the right one. It was to help her sleep. She's restless. You know she gets restless." "She wasn't restless," she whispered. "She was fine until all this." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is because of him. He's filling your head with nonsense. He wants to control you. He's never liked me." I didn't respond. Instead,
I slid forward the screenshot of his late-night text, telling me to stop interfering. Then the messages accusing me of starting trouble. Then the note from the pharmacist confirming he'd asked whether the medication would knock out a kid. The air shifted sharply. My daughter's shoulders sagged as though she'd been holding up the whole house by herself. She stared at the table, not at him, not at me, just at the mess of proof that had been hidden under her roof for years. He lunged for the reports, sweeping some of them onto the floor. "You think you can come into my home and ambush me?" he shouted. "You think you can paint me as some monster? I've done everything for this family." My daughter inhaled sharply at that. Everything for the family. Even he knew those words were hollow. I crouched down, collected the pages he had knocked over, and placed them back on the table, one by one. "You endangered a child," I said. "There's nothing left to argue." Something snapped then, not in me, but in him. He began pacing, muttering curses, flinging accusations in every direction. He claimed stress. He blamed work. He blamed his childhood. He claimed the bottle wasn't his. He claimed the pharmacy mix-up wasn't his fault. He claimed my granddaughter was exaggerating. He claimed I didn't respect him. He claimed everyone misunderstood him. He claimed everything except responsibility. Meanwhile, my daughter stood motionless. She had tears now, but they came in slow, disbelieving drops, as if her body refused to cry faster than her mind could catch up. He finally pointed to the door. "Get out," he said, voice breaking. "Get out of my house." I looked at my daughter. "Do you want me to leave?" She shook her head. Not a big gesture, just enough to answer. He saw it, and something broke inside him. "You'll choose him over me, after everything I've done," he yelled. Her whisper reached us both. "You've done enough." His face twisted. He reached for the evidence again, as though destroying the pages would undo the truth they carried. I gathered the documents calmly into the folder, piece by piece, methodical as a man tying a knot. He kept shouting. His voice rose, cracked, dropped, rose again. He kicked a chair. He slammed the fridge door. He kept insisting he was the victim. I didn't respond. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer a single insult or explanation. Silence can be sharper than shouting. When everything was back in the folder, I slipped the bottle inside, closed the clasp, and straightened up. My daughter watched me. Her hands trembled, but her expression had cleared into something resolute. He followed me to the hallway, still yelling. "You won't win. I won't let you take my family. I won't let you make me look like the bad guy." I lifted the folder under my arm. "You don't need my help with that," I said. His shouting grew louder as I stepped outside, but I didn't look back. The door vibrated once when he slammed it behind me. I walked down the front steps, the folder tucked against my ribs, the air cool against my neck. The sounds from inside the house kept boiling for several minutes, muffled and frantic. Then, somewhere between the third and fourth step, the noise faded, replaced by my own breathing and the faint stir of the afternoon breeze. I reached my car and rested a hand on the roof for a moment, not to steady myself, just to pause long enough to let the clarity settle. The folder sat on the passenger seat when I got in, evidence arranged, truth uncovered, lines drawn. I started the engine and let the car roll forward, thinking quietly about everything that still needed to be done. The clerk at the Cook County Courthouse didn't ask many questions.
She glanced at the stack of documents I placed on the counter. The medical report, the pharmacy note, the screenshots, the financial records, the printed messages, and her expression sharpened just enough to tell me she understood more than she was required to say. She stamped the forms, slid them into a bin, and handed me a receipt confirming the petition for emergency guardianship. My daughter stood beside me, fingers clasped around a pen she had used moments earlier to sign her own statement. Her signature trembled at the edges, but the line itself was firm. She wasn't the same woman who had once whispered excuses for her husband. Something inside her had settled, the way soil settles after a storm, packed and solid. We walked out into the hallway. She stopped midway, leaning against the wall, pressing her palms into her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, "I should have seen it sooner." "You saw it now," I said. "That's what matters." She nodded. The guilt lingered in the curve of her shoulders.
We stayed there a minute longer, letting the fluorescent hum fill the pauses where words didn't belong. Later that afternoon, the judge issued the temporary order. My son-in-law didn't bother showing up to contest it, though he sent 4 angry voicemails and 2 texts, insisting I had manipulated everyone. His voice in the messages swung wildly. Rage at first, then pleading, then insults, then a final claim that he was the true victim. I stopped listening after the first one. By evening, my daughter drove to her house to collect her things. I followed in my own car, giving her space. She moved through the rooms with measured steps, folding children's clothes into bags, tucking drawings into a folder. My son-in-law wasn't there, whether by accident or choice, I didn't know. His absence made the house feel like a shell, a place where arguments clung to the walls, even when the voices were gone.
My daughter paused in the doorway of the bedroom. "This used to feel like home," she said softly. "Homes change," I replied. "People change them." She closed the light behind us, and we left with only what mattered. The next morning, the order was served. He had 48 hours to vacate the property, which was titled solely under her name. When he realized the court had accepted the evidence without hesitation, he called my daughter 15 times. She didn't answer. The silence she gave him was steady, calm, almost cold. Not revenge, simply a refusal to participate any longer. He tried one last attempt by confronting me over the phone. "You can't just rip my family away. You think you're some hero?" "I'm a grandfather," I said. "That's enough." He cursed until his voice cracked. I ended the call without responding. 2 days later, my granddaughter and I carried her small suitcase into my house in South Chicago. She walked around slowly, taking in the living room she'd visited countless times, but now seemed to see differently. "Grandpa," she asked, "can I stay in the room with the blue curtains?" "You can stay wherever you feel safe." Her smile warmed the doorway. She unpacked her stuffed rabbit and placed it on the bed, smoothing the ears as though reassuring it that things were different now. Her breathing sounded lighter than it had in weeks. That evening, I turned on the old radio in the kitchen while heating up dinner. Jazz floated through the room, grainy and warm. My granddaughter sat at the table colouring, her tongue peeking out between her teeth in concentration. She hummed a little as she drew. I hadn't heard her hum in a long time. Between stirring the pot and setting plates, I caught myself watching her, not hovering, just observing the gentle ease returning to her posture. She didn't hide behind her shoulders. She didn't glance constantly toward the door. She didn't jerk at the smallest sound. Freedom for a child doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, in the steadiness of breath, in the looseness of a small body finally allowed to rest. My daughter came over later that night with a few more of the child's belongings. She kissed her daughter's head, hugged her tightly, then sat across from me after we tucked the little one into bed. "Do you think she'll forget everything?" she asked. "Children don't forget," I said, "but they heal." She folded her hands. "I'm scared of what comes next." "You're not alone," I replied. She looked up at me, eyes damp but steadier than before. "Thank you for stepping in. I don't know where we'd be without you." "Where you are now," I said. "Just maybe a little later." She let out a quiet breath, half a sigh, half a release, and stayed a while longer before heading home. I walked her to the door, watched her drive away, then locked up and returned to the kitchen. The radio played softly. I washed the dishes with slow, deliberate movements, not because I was tired, but because the rhythm felt grinding. Each motion had purpose. Each sound belonged. The court date for the final order came 2 weeks later. My daughter and I sat at the same table, hands resting on the same folder of evidence. My son-in-law arrived looking dishevelled and restless. He avoided eye contact, choosing instead to glare at the judge, at the clerk, at anyone who didn't bend to the story he still tried to tell. The judge reviewed the documents, listened to the recordings, examined the statements, and asked only a few precise questions. My daughter answered steadily. I answered when needed. My former son-in-law rambled, contradicted himself, tried to twist timelines that the paperwork had already pinned down. When the judge issued the final decision, his voice didn't waver. Full guardianship granted to the maternal grandfather. Supervised visitation only. Financial restitution required. The pen signed. The gavel tapped. The matter closed. Outside the courthouse, my daughter was quiet, not sad, simply processing. The kind of quiet that accompanies a long exhale after holding tension for too many months. "I should go pick her up," she said finally. "I'll come with you," I replied. We walked to the car together, talking about mundane things. The school project due next week, the grocery list, the shoes my granddaughter was outgrowing. Life settling itself into smaller rhythms again. That evening after dinner, I tucked my granddaughter into her bed with the blue curtains. She curled under the quilt, holding her rabbit to her chest. "Grandpa," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." "Are we staying here for real?" "For real." She nodded and closed her eyes. Her breathing grew steady within minutes. I stepped out of the room and pulled the door until it was almost closed, leaving a small sliver of hallway light spilling into the corner where her toys were arranged. The house felt full in a way it hadn't since my daughter was little. When I reached the front door later that night to lock it, a faint breeze drifted through before the latch clicked. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the handle. No anger stirred, no bitterness rose, no triumph swelled. Only a quiet sense of order settling back into place. Not justice with fanfare, not revenge with noise, just the return of what had been taken. I shut the door gently and let the silence follow me into the kitchen, where the radio hummed low and the warmth of a child's safety lingered like a soft, steady truth.